Hi folks, welcome to the sectoral analysis and securitization lecture. And so this is another lecture that is it is theory based, but the theory has actually resulted in a method of analysis that is it has had quite an impact in international relations methodology. Right? So let's have a look at sectoral analysis and securitization. Okay, so the first half of this lecture is going to be a little bit text heavy on the slides. So I apologise for that, but sometimes you just got to wade through it. But the second half of the lecture will be looking at video clips and applying what we talk about in the first half. Okay, so bear with me. Right. So what is security? So with the end of the Cold War, there was a really heated debate between those that argued that the study of security should be widened to include more than simply nuclear deterrence and military strategy, and that the core international relations subjects, whether they called their major security or strategic studies, right? So there was actually quite a bit of debate about this. And people inside academia and outside of it argued that the concept and the study of security had to be widened to include all sorts of really important issues. Issues like the impact of the global economy, the environment, weak states and civil wars, international crime, or really anything that was focused on the state and military threats to it had decreased in importance. So lots of big important stuff that wasn't able to be really studied within the existing theories of IR now sort of became possible. And so there was this wideners, if you like, and traditionalists debate. And so Uzan and Weaver published their book, Security, A New Framework for Analysis in 1998 as an answer to this problem. And their answer was to expand the sectors of security analysis from the normal military and political by adding 3 extra sectors: the environment, the society, and the economy. Right? So the definitions they gave them are the following. Military security concerns the 2-level interplay of the armed, offensive and defensive capabilities of states and states' perceptions of each other's intentions. Political security concerns the organisational stability of states, systems of government and the ideologies that give them legitimacy. Economic security concerns the access to resources, finance, markets, everything necessary to sustain acceptable levels of welfare and state power. Societal security concerns the sustainability within acceptable conditions for evolution of traditional patterns of language, culture, religious and national identity and custom. And environmental security concerns the maintenance of the local and the planetary biosphere as the essential support system on which all other human enterprises depend. And these align somewhat with the UN development goals, right? Or at least the last 3 do, whereas the first 2 are the traditional focus of international relations study. So if we were face to face, I would get a bit of a discussion going by asking some questions about can you give me some examples of, say, societal security? What would be an example of that? Right? So one example I might give is maybe Australian Aboriginals, right? So they are in a struggle to keep their language and their culture alive, and rather than just sort of losing it all and becoming absorbed into the wider Australian culture. And Australia is a multicultural society, so it's not trying to wipe out cultures anymore, given our colonial past. The last several generations have been trying to make keeping alive the culture of the native Australians easier. But and this is really an issue for minorities everywhere, right? And it's an issue for all of our immigrant population, right? So there is this struggle to keep not only language alive, as generations, right, go along, but also just the wider culture, right? But what do I mean by a phrase "keeping alive"? Right? So by that, I would mean having their children learn the language and the culture. So these sort of issues tend to revolve around what languages are taught and used in schools and even universities. But can you see how a security dilemma and a paradox can take hold around these issues? Right? So if the minority is large enough, right? So say French-speaking Canadians, right? When you have a large minority that wants to have its own schools and universities, and that can generate a security dilemma for the majority, and this eventually leads to this. It can lead to separatist movements, right? And so that creates a bit of a security dilemma, and perhaps violence or even a terror campaign, or even a civil war can break out, right? Because of this attempt to remain separate than the wider society. So the larger the minority, the greater the geographic and the greater the geographical concentration, the greater the threat is of a breakaway movement, right, or an independence movement. And Australian Aboriginals aren't actually a very good example of that. But say because they're so spread out and there's so many different tribes, right? There's so many different nations within the Aboriginal culture. So they're probably not a very good example of a security dilemma. And Australian culture is pretty good at handling these sort of pressures now. But so maybe take Hungarians in Transylvania, which is part of Romania. They wanted separate schools and universities, and this triggered a societal security dilemma with the Romanian majority, because the Hungarians were the majority in a particular area, right? Like they were large enough to create fears of ambitions of a breakaway republic. You could look at the breakup of Yugoslavia in the same way, with this societal security dilemma and paradoxes kicking off. And the more one group tries to strengthen and defend themselves culturally, the more it can threaten other groups, right? And so having this societal security as a focus of research and just a focus of analysis can reveal these sort of pressures. So, and whereas the other ones, environmental security, obviously, we're all scared of global warming now. Economic security is obviously at the forefront of everyone's minds. Military and political security, we probably don't need too many examples of these, but societal security is one of those ones that can be a bit confusing. So, the sectors approach is probably one of the most useful, or it is most usefully thought of as a checklist or a framework by which you can structure a research project and make comparisons across states, cases. Right? It's important to keep in mind about the sectors approach that the reference object, so the object that you want to keep secure, the reference object can change. So for example, a state could be the reference object and the sectors are used to examine the sources of threat to that state that come from each of these sectors. But also you could change the reference object to say threats to Australian Aborigines and apply each sector to their security and see what is most important and how they link and overlap and compare. Right? So they don't face a physical or a military threat anymore. They don't have their children stolen anymore. But their identity, their societal security is still a major problem. And that is just the surface, right? You'd want to look at deaths in prisons or deaths by domestic violence and abuse as physical threats to the reference object of Australian Aboriginals. You'd probably also want to discuss the tension between needing to adapt and change their society to be able to succeed in a national or a global economy where not letting their culture and language, so doing that, adapting, but at the same time not letting their language and culture be completely assimilated. So it would be interesting to compare it to, say, Indian immigrants or Greek immigrants or Muslim immigrants. Do they feel the same pressure to maintain their Indianness, or is the fact that there is a state of India keeping the identity of India alive, does that release them from the sort of responsibility to keep their culture alive? So that would be interesting. Anyway, this sectoral approach is like a checklist, and the reference object can and is designed to be other things other than the state, right? Plus now textbooks and probably entire courses are built around using these 5 sectors as basic themes within security studies, looking at each as a distinct security area. Plus you could easily add sectors to this analysis. You don't have to be examining security. You could also use the sectoral approach with any theory to examine anything, really. So it's kind of a handy research blueprint. Okay. Okay. So another part of Buzan and Weaver's or the Copenhagen School's approach is what it's actually called, is the idea of security complexes. All right? And so this is a definition that they give. A security complex is defined as a set of states whose major security perceptions and concerns are so interlinked that their national security problems cannot be reasonably analysed or resolved apart from one another. A distinctive territorial pattern of security interdependence, so positive or negative, right? You could be allies or enemies, must exist that marks off the members of a security complex from neighbouring states. And this pattern has to be strong enough to make the criteria for inclusion or exclusion reasonably clear. So the idea here is that you're looking for security complexes or linked actors, right? Ones that are so involved in each other that you can't analyze one without the other. So you're looking for security complexes within each sector, right? So number one, what is the security? What are the security issues, right? Are there any existential threats? So in this sector for the reference object, right? Is there anything that threatens their existence? Number two, what are the relevant units and how are they arranged? What types of actors are distinctive to this sector, right? So maybe you're analysing state-to-state relations, right, in a region or something like that, or you're analysing Aboriginal relations, in a particular area, particular nation, right? And who do they interact with and that sort of thing. So the reference object can change, but you're looking for these linkages. Number three, how does the security dynamics within the sector divide among the local, regional, or global, right? So Aboriginal Australians face global warming as a threat, maybe even an existential threat, right? At the global level, regional and local, right? Okay, yep. So what is the logic of threats and vulnerabilities? Right? So you're trying to get at the internal mechanics of that, right? Explaining the vulnerabilities and explaining the threats. And what are the patterns of enmity and amity, or blockage and cooperation? Who are friends and who are enemies, right? Within the context of the sectors, right? So you're doing this for each sector. You're asking these 5 questions, looking for the linkages within each sector. So you're looking at the military sector analysis, the political, right? So within the political, you can look at Aboriginal Australians and what is their political security? What is the relevant units and how are they arranged? How does the security dynamics, the political security, divide up between local, regional, and global, right? And what is the logic of threats to the political security of Aboriginal Australians, right? And what are the patterns of, who are friends and who are enemies, right? And you can keep going down, right? So economic security, right? You ask all those questions. Societal or cultural security, right? So all these questions can be asked for each sector, and each sector can be asked for different reference objects. Okay, so and the last one is, what is the distribution of power among the principal units, right? So you've mapped out all these security complexes, right? These linkages within the sector that you're looking at, and what is the distribution of power, right? Maybe the local has a lot of power and the regional is very weak, or vice versa. or that sort of thing. Let me give you another example of how this this sectorial analysis with security complexes can be used. So something like, say you're a graduate officer in the Department of Education, and you've been given the task of assessing the success of a new school's building program. Say the one that they did to pump money into the economy after the 2008 global recession, right? So in Australia, we pumped money into school building programs to employ builders and to get money into the economy, right? So you could use this sector blueprint to assess the reference object, right? So in this case, it's the success of the building program. And the areas you'd need to look at are physical, political, economic, environmental, and identity, right? And within each, you are identifying the security complexes, right? The relevant units, the security issues, the issues that are not dealt with, so the issues that, if not dealt with, threaten the survival of the reference object. So in this case, the success of the program. So the sectorial blueprint is really handy, even if you're not doing international relations, right? So I just wanted to make you aware of this methodology because I think it's very transferable to whatever research role you end up in, even if it's nothing to do with international relations. Okay, the third Copenhagen School's approach is equally useful, and it's the concept of securitization. So securitization is what happens when an issue or an event or something, an issue is lifted from the arena of normal politics, right? So the arena of normal politics is a debate about who gets how much, right? It's really a debate about who gets what money, or who gets what access, or what laws are going to be written, right? And that's just the normal give and take of politics. But if an issue becomes securitized, then what it means is that the issue gets lifted out of the realm of normal politics and becomes a threat to the society of such a high level that that normal politics for this issue gets suspended, right? And the government is allowed to take emergency measures, right? So say something like terrorism, or terrorist attacks, or maybe the global COVID-19 pandemic, right? In Australia or all over the world, people's rights are being taken away by the government. They're saying, right, you have to stay indoors, right? That's not really imaginable 6 months ago, right? Whereas now you can get arrested for having a party or something like that, right? So the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic has been securitized, right? And so let me read you a definition of securitization here. Even if the general logic of securitization is clear, we have to be precise about its threshold. A discourse that takes the form of presenting something as an existential threat to the reference object does not itself create the securitization. This is a securitizing move, but the issue is securitized only if and when the audience accepts it as such. We do not push the demand so high as to say that an emergency measure has to be adopted, only that the existential threat has to be argued and just gain enough resonance for a platform to be made from which it is possible to legitimize emergency measures or other steps that would not have been possible had the discourse not taken the form of existential threats, point of no return, and necessity. So, analysis of securitizing speech acts, right? So this is going back to a constructivist discourse analysis type of thing, where what matters is the arguments that are being put forward, right? And a speech act is an argument for securitizing something, right? So here you've got 4 parts of it, right? You've got the reference objects, so things, so it could be states or groups or collectives of some type that are seen to be existentially threatened and that have a legitimate claim to survival, right? Next, you have the securitizing actors. So actors who securitize issues by declaring something, right, the reference object, existentially threatened unless the issue is dealt with using extraordinary measures. So this could be, so if the reference object is Australian Aboriginal culture, maybe the securitizing actor is a firebrand who is saying, look, our very existence is threatened, right? If assimilation continues like this, we will cease to exist as a separate people, right? And so we have to take extraordinary measures, not things where it's just normal negotiating things. Maybe we have to take up arms or plant bombs or things like that, right? Maybe Australian Aboriginals is not a good example. Maybe Muslim extremists in I don't know, Israel, or so you can see that the securitizing actor is usually a political entrepreneur or a political leader, and they are presenting the argument that, hey, this situation goes beyond politics. This is an existential threat. Then you have functional actors. So these are actors who affect the dynamics of a sector without being the reference object or the actor calling for security on behalf of the reference object. So this is an actor who significantly influences decisions in the field of security. So perhaps a polluting company, for example, can be a central actor in the environmental sector, but it's not the reference object, right? And it is not trying to securitize environmental issues. Quite the contrary. Polluting companies are spending money lobbying to keep the environment as a non-securitized issue, right? And then lastly, you have the relevant audience, right? So this is who has to accept the argument for the normal rules to be broken, right? So that might be Parliament, or that might be the wider community, or maybe it's just a small group of extremists, right? That someone's trying to rev up for violence, or something like that. Okay, so that's all. That's all the textual stuff that I want to give you. Now I just want to give you, I think 6 or 7 little video clips, and have you try and work out what is the issue that they're trying to securitize, right? Who is the securitizing agent, right? And we'll just work through some and hopefully cement this analytical methodology, right?
Sie haben früher alle gelacht, diese Juden. Sie haben das für einen Spaß gehalten. Sie lachen heute nicht mehr. Sie wissen, es ist ein blutiger Ernst geworden. Es war doch ein Kampf, besonders aber auch gegen das Volk, das in unserem Land schon fast allmächtig zu sein schien. Der Kampf gegen das Judentum. Und was das bedeutete, das weiß der heute geboren wird, in der Zukunft überhaupt nicht mehr. Eine satanische Macht, die von unserem ganzen Volk Besitz ergriffen hatte. Die alle Schlüsselstellungen des geistigen, intellektuellen Lebens, aber auch des politischen und des wirtschaftlichen in der Hand gebracht hatte. Und das von diesen Schlüsselstellungen aus die ganze Nation überwachte. Eine Macht, die zugleich auch Einfluss besaß, denjenigen, wenn notwendig sogar mit dem Gesetz zu verfolgen, der es unternahm, sich dem Kampf gegen diese Macht anzuschließen und der bereit war, Widerstand dem Vordringen dieser Macht entgegenzusetzen. Das allmächtige Judentum hat uns damals den Krieg angesagt und Sie wissen auch.
So what is the reference object here, right? What is being supposedly threatened? So Germany or maybe European civilization, right? So what's the security issue? What is the threat? Jews, right? Apparently. And who's the securitizing actor? Hitler, right? And what are the extraordinary measures that he's seeking to gain approval for? Well, so mass murder, right? Like he's gassed 6 million Jews, right? So so here we have a securitizing issue, a securitization of an issue. I wanted to start with this one so that I can put securitization as a concept in a negative light, right? Like sometimes securitization is used positively, right? That we would all agree that maybe terrorism or COVID-19 needs extraordinary measures, right? That break the normal rules of our society or politics. But there's lots of issues that shouldn't be securitized, right? Okay, here's another one.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished colleagues, I would like to begin by expressing my thanks for the special effort that each of you made to be here today. This is an important day for us all as we review the situation with respect to Iraq and its disarmament obligations under UN Security Council Resolution 1441. Last November 8th, this Council passed Resolution 1441 by a unanimous vote. The purpose of that resolution was to disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had already been found guilty of material breach of its obligations stretching back over 16 previous resolutions and 12 years. Resolution 1441 was not dealing with an innocent party, but a regime this Council has repeatedly convicted over the years. Resolution 1441 gave Iraq one last chance to come into compliance or to face serious consequences. No Council member present and voting on that day had any illusions about the nature and intent of the resolution or what serious consequences meant if Iraq did not comply.
So serious consequences, right? So what's happening here, right? So this is the Colin Powell's famous speech to the Security Council, trying to get their okay for an invasion of Iraq, and presenting some evidence that turned out to be completely wrong, that they had nuclear weapons or chemical weapons, and almost certainly the greatest strategic mistake that the United States has ever made, probably. Disaster all round. Anyway, so who is the reference object here? So it's probably international peace, or maybe the Chemical Weapons Convention, right? Or the previous Security Council resolution ordering the Iraq government to allow inspectors and cooperate. So what's the security issue? Well, it would be Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, right? So the security issue, what is the threat? It's their supposedly hidden weapons of mass destruction. Who is the securitizing actor? Well, it's Colin Powell, but it's really the US government, or the Bush administration, Bush Jr. And who is the relevant audience, right? Who are they trying to convince to allow extraordinary measures? So here it's the Security Council, right? And their governments. So, and perhaps their publics for those members that are democracies, but definitely their governments are the relevant audience here. And so, what are the normal rules that the US is asking the Security Council to break? So probably here, state sovereignty, right? It's illegal to invade other countries now, right? It didn't used to be, but now there's United Nations resolution, and so the system of state sovereignty is the normal rules, and Colin Powell here is asking for approval for the okay from the Security Council to break those normal rules. And was this securitizing move successful? No, it wasn't, right? So the Security Council voted against it, so the US went without Security Council approval. Well, they actually said that they were just implementing the 1441 resolution from previous, and they didn't need any further UN sanction to impose the penalties the Security Council had already agreed to in the resolution 1441. So, debatable.
We begin in Thailand, where the military staged a coup on Thursday, just 2 days after declaring martial law and denying there would be a coup. Army Chief General Prayuth Chan-o-cha went on national television to announce that the military was taking over control of Thailand, which has been rocked by protests and political chaos for the past 6 months. This is what he said. In order for the country to return to normal quickly, the National Peacekeeping Committee, comprised of the Army, the Thai Armed Forces, the Royal Air Force, and the police, need to seize power as of May 22nd at 4:30 p.m. Now, the events unraveled quickly after Tuesday's martial law declaration, with the Army chief arranging talks between different political leaders to try to come to a resolution. But on Thursday, after a 2-hour meeting, the Army was deployed and those participating in the talks were sent to an unknown location, paving the way for the coup. This marks the 12th time that the Army has overthrown a government ever since Thailand abolished absolute monarchy in 1932. While the military did away with the caretaker government, it expects other bodies, such as the Senate, to function normally. Following the coup, the Army's new military junta asked protest camps to break up. It also announced it was suspending Thailand's constitution temporarily and imposing a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. The military has also taken control of broadcast networks, as you can see in the following tweets from James Bessenval. He writes, "These are the symbols of the national military blocking out all television channels in Thailand. And military coup affecting all of Thailand. Military's taken over TV. The only thing is Thai royal family news." Now, the Army chief has declared that foreigners and foreign embassies will remain safe.
Okay, so this is a report about a securitizing move, right? So what is the reference object here? Well, the Thailand state or Thailand society, right? And what's the security issue? Well, it's protests or social unrest, protests against the democratically elected government, right? And who is the securitizing actor? Well, it's the military, right? They're trying to, well, and what is the extraordinary measures that the military are trying to justify, trying to, securitize? Well, it's a military coup, right? So, so suspending the normal rules of politics, a military coup suspends the normal government, right? Like that's pretty extreme, extraordinary measure, right? Who is the relevant audience? Well, probably just the military, as they have the power to suppress any other actor if they choose to act, right? So the military, including right down to the soldiers that the generals need to follow their orders, right? The generals need the foot soldiers to remain obedient, right? So that the coup works. So it's the relevant audience is within the military, right? And perhaps maybe some other parts of government. They kept the Senate and expected them to function normally. But I'm not sure how they would do that with the military in control, but I'm sure they'd just become a rubber stamp situation rather than a real Senate. Though this is the 12th military coup, so maybe this is what's normal, right? Maybe this isn't a securitizing move. Maybe it's just normal politics in Thailand. I'm not sure. Okay, so and what are the? Okay, here's another one. Okay, so this poster reads: since 9/11 or the attacks of September 11th, right? Over 3,000 women have been killed in Australia by their partners. Only 2 have been killed by terrorism. But which one are we all talking about? So is this a securitizing move? I don't think so. They're not saying the existence of Australia or Australian society is threatened. I mean, they are saying that the existence of women is being threatened, right? But I think it's more an attempt to politicize domestic violence rather than securitize it, right? They're not really asking for the normal rules of politics or laws or anything to be broken to solve the issue. What they're asking for is it to become a political issue so that resources and time and laws can be allocated to solving it, right? And they believe it can be solved if the resources are applied to it as per the normal workings of politics and the state, right? So I think you could argue that this isn't a securitizing move. It's a politicizing move. Yeah.
The real issue here is electricity. And the real issue behind it, the thing that we are most concerned about, is climate change. And the conventional wisdom on climate change is that basically what we have is a situation of partly natural, but mostly human-induced, mostly by the use of fossil fuels. We are seeing a gradual rise in the temperature of the Earth, and that this will take place over the next several centuries and will rise maybe 3, 4, 5 degrees a century, and we're not going to like the consequences, especially if you live in the Maldives or Bangladesh, places like that, which will progressively disappear under rising seas. Now, that could happen. That's possible, but I think there's a much worse scenario that we face, and a far more likely scenario, and that the science and the evidence is pointing us in that direction. And you get a hint of it by looking backwards, and that is that what we face is the possibility not of several centuries of gradual global warming, but abrupt climate change. That is, rapid changes in our climate, as we've experienced many times in the past, changes of 5, 10 degrees over the course of a decade, not centuries.
So what's the reference object here? Well, human civilization, human existence, the survival of our species, maybe. If he's right in that we could get a 10-degree change in, within a decade, that's the end of human life, right? It would be famines and drownings everywhere. So the environment is actually very interesting in terms of studying securitization, because it's presented in two ways: as a sector of other things, as a threat to either the state or society or the current level of human civilization, but it's also presented as the reference object in and of itself, right? So we need to save nature, right? Or we need to stop global warming so that nature doesn't kill us, right? Like there's two ways of it being presented. So, but when speaking to people that may not value the environment in and of itself, it's often presented as an issue that threatens the survival of other things, right? So I bet in Bangladesh it's being talked about that way, right? That, hey, we've got to stop global warming or else half our country is going to be underwater. Or the current level of human civilization, as in this clip. So who's the securitizing actor? Well, it is this particular speaker, but he's really part of a broader scientific community generally, I think, that is trying to make the environment a securitized issue. They're not doing a very good job because they're scientists, not politicians. But I think it's the scientific community generally. So who's the relevant audience? Well, state governments are the ones with the power to actually do something, so they're really the audience. Perhaps general publics again, but only in well-functioning democracy, so state governments probably. So what are the normal rules that that they're asking, or what's the extraordinary measures that's being asked for? Well, maybe some sort of coordinated action and regulation. But is that really extraordinary? I'm not sure. So maybe this isn't a securitizing move, right? They're not calling for military action against countries that won't stop polluting, right? I mean, maybe not yet, right? So perhaps this isn't a securitizing move. Perhaps it is a politicizing move. Debatable. Anyway, here's another one.
Okay. Hi, my name is Bob. In view of its potential to be possibly the biggest game changer ever, do you have any plans to enter the field of artificial intelligence? And in general, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it's even close to being ready for prime time?
I think we should be very careful about artificial intelligence. If I were to guess at what our biggest existential threat is, it's probably that. So we need to be very careful with artificial intelligence. I'm increasingly inclined to think that there should be some regulatory oversight maybe at the national and international level, just to make sure that we don't do something very foolish. I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know all those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, he's sure he can control the demon. Doesn't work out.
So Elon Musk, often referred to as Iron Man. So probably one of the greatest thinkers, certainly one of the greatest achievers of all time, right? And he's warning us about the threat of artificial intelligence, like proper, real thinking for itself. So what's the reference object here? Well, human civilization, or maybe even human existence. Who's the securitizing actor? Well, Elon Musk here. Stephen Hawking is also issued a lot of public warnings. Who's the relevant audience? Well, elites or state governments, right? And what's the normal rules that he's asking to be broken? Well, the unrestricted use and advancement of science and scientific discovery, right? Like it's not normal to, or hasn't been normal to place restrictions on scientific progress. But he's asking for this, to be regulated, maybe even banned, right? Has this securitizing move been successful? No, not yet. All the advanced militaries are probably working on AI, and this is a very scary situation. We don't want armies of robots, able to do the will of small groups of people, right? And we certainly don't want them becoming self-aware and all that sort of thing, right? The Terminator style nightmare. Okay. Anyway, here's so it hasn't been a very successful securitizing move yet. Elon actually talks about how disappointed he is and terrified. Anyway, here's another one.
Others say that you downplay the importance of terrorism. You want to downgrade it as a threat to the United States.
Well, look, I have to talk to the families of those who are killed by terrorists. I have to talk to the families of soldiers of ours who fought to make sure that Al-Qaeda and the Fatah couldn't carry out attacks against us again. So I think I'm pretty mindful of the terrible costs of terrorism around the world. What I do insist on is that we maintain a proper perspective, and that we do not provide a victory to these terrorist networks by overinflating their importance and suggesting in some fashion that they are an existential threat to the United States or the world order. The truth of the matter is that they can do harm, but we have the capacity to control how we respond in ways that do not undercut what's the essence of who we are. That means that we don't torture, for example, and thereby undermine our values and credibility around the world.
So what's going on here? Is this a securitizing move? No, it's actually a desecuritizing move. What's the reference object here? The US state, maybe international peace, or the US society, right? He's trying to desecuritize terrorism and bring it back within the normal boundaries of politics and the normal rules of American society, right? So he said, they don't torture, right? If you securitize something, well, you can do anything, right? The rules get thrown out of the window. But he's trying to desecuritize it so that it is contained within the normal ways of doing things, right? So who's the securitizing actor? Well, he's President Obama, right? Who's the relevant audience? Well, the US elite and maybe the public. And what are the normal rules that he wants reinstated? So normal policing rather than war, or at least normal Geneva Convention rules of war, right? That state you're not allowed to torture. Was this desecuritizing move successful? Well, it's debatable. The US is still in the Middle East fighting, but another full-scale invasion is probably politically impossible for the US to do if the reason given is to stop terrorism, right? Maybe. So it's an interesting question. I don't think it was I don't think the desecuritizing move, at least by Obama, was successful. But I think, well, they're out of Afghanistan now, and but maybe that's just a new generation of leaders saying that, yeah, look, we've lost this one, so let's just cut our losses and get out. So maybe, I don't know, debatable. But the use of securitization and even sectoral analysis is a really handy way of analyzing politics and political events, right? And actually, and it's not just securitization moves, it's desecuritization moves, and it's politicization moves and depoliticizing things. Can anyone think of a depoliticizing move? Sorry, I'm talking like I'm in front of a class, but so for example, a move that is depoliticizing an issue is, or at least in Australia, one of the things that springs to mind is control of central banks, right? So setting the interest rates, that was taken out of the government's hands and made the central bank's decisions completely independent, because the government realized that if it remained within the power of governments to set the interest rates for Australian society, for the Australian market, it will always be a political issue, and that wasn't good, right? We needed it to be a non-political issue. It wasn't because politics is about balances of power, right? And that's not the way to decide what your interest rates need to be, right? So they've depoliticized it by making the Reserve Bank and the board completely independent of politics. So so that is sectoral analysis and securitization. I hope you found that informative and interesting, and it is a very useful set of tools. So I'll see you in the next lecture.